My name is Chris Timol. I'm the co-founder and president of PuzzleHR here in Tampa, Florida. I am joined by my good friend and legal expert because I cannot speak publicly about anything without Deanna with me, because otherwise I'll get myself in trouble. We have Deanna Hayes, one of the top legal minds here in Tampa, Florida, partner at Ogletree Deakins. Hi, Deanna.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Not at all. Not at all. Love doing these webinars with you. So, today, we're not going to do, we have a couple of slides. We're not going to spend a lot of time with slides today. It's just really kind of going to be a conversation where we talk about a bunch of things related to the cannabis space. And so first of all, thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. A couple of housekeeping things. There's about like a Q&A box down at the bottom. Feel free to pop if you have a question, just go ahead and pop it in there. I've got the side panel here. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. So feel free to ask away. I mean, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So make sure that you do that. Also, if you've registered for the webinar, two things. So this is the three things, I guess. So one, this is going to be recorded. We're going to host this. This will sit out on our YouTube site, so you can come back and watch this whenever you want. Two, if you registered for the webinar, we're going to plant a tree for you. So here at Puzzle, we partner with a company called Ogletree, and we, in an effort to have a more verdant world and help with everything that's going on relative to climate change, we do plant trees on a monthly basis. And so for everyone that registered, we're going to plant a tree in your honor, an actual tree. I think the puzzle forest, as it were, is in Madagascar or something like that. So there'll be a link in the YouTube. So if you're so inclined, you can check out the puzzle. You can check out the puzzle forest if you wish, and plant trees yourself. Last thing is we've got an ebook around all the topics that we're going to talk about today. Ebook is coming out, so you can just pop on to get in contact with us. You'll have our contact information at the end, and register, and you can grab our ebook. So with that said, the reason we decided to do this was because at Puzzle, let me see if I can share this here. So we went to MJ BizCon a few months ago. Let's see if I can pop this open. Yeah, so we went to MJ BizCon a couple of months ago, and this is us there at MJ Biz. So we went to MJ BizCon, and we were absolutely overwhelmed by the number of cannabis entrepreneurs coming to our booth and asking questions about human resources. They asked about talent acquisition. They asked about regulation, compliance, just a number of different things. And I just thought, what better way to kind of get this message out, to folks in the cannabis space to help cannabis businesses than to just kind of throw some content together in a webinar. And if this goes well, we'll probably do another one or a couple of these on a go forward basis. So the way I sort of see the cannabis space, Deanna and I were talking about this, is, and I've been in the HR outsourcing industry for a really long time, right? Let's say since the early 90s. And so I've met with thousands and thousands of business owners and entrepreneurs over the years. And what I found really interesting, or what I find really interesting about the cannabis space, is it's kind of right, like each cannabis business can be like almost five. They've got the issues of 5 different types of industries kind of all rolled into one, right? What do I mean by that? Well, you've got first, it starts with regulation, right? It starts with regulation, just like they got the same sorts of regulations, even more than like a pharmaceutical or pharmaceutical manufacturing firm would have, right? So pharma manufacturing, right? lines, safety, all that sort of stuff. And then the government regulations around product, et cetera, also, really just looming over the businesses. Then you've got like retail, right? So what's retail? That is high volume, high turnover, low wage employees coming in and out, all the time. Then you've got like tech, right? I think like San Francisco, I think technology, right? Like those tech startups. You've got that high energy tech startup thing. And then you've got, and I think about like the restaurant space, right? Fun, young, that sort of environment, I guess you could call it. All of those sort of 5 things kind of come together, and what happens? You get all of the issues of those 5 places kind of magnified, right? What does that mean? You get talent acquisition issues. How do I hire the right people to come in and kind of run my organization? You've got people who want to be there because they feel like it can be a fun place to work and it's a fun industry, when the fact of the matter, it's really a business, right? So you've got people, especially in leadership, right, with just lack experience, and they just don't know how to either be in the workspace, or they don't know how to lead employees and or recruit or interview people. And then all of the, then again, remember all the regulations on top of that, all those things, come together, and, you add those things up and you just get HR issues. So we just thought that it would be a service to the entrepreneurs in the cannabis space, to spend some time and talk through kind of some of these things. That's just us, and that's just the MJ BizCon. Like, that was a crazy, crazy show, 50,000 people. I was joking, we might have to get 2 booths next year. So Deanna, so these are some of the top legal issues. You want to kind of touch on these things, right?
Sure. So, and I'll give an overview. And if you have questions about any of these, like Chris said, feel free to use the Q&A box and we can drill down to the extent that you want to. But we took a look at this and said, what are the big picture legal issues that cannabis businesses need to be aware of? And we understand that some of these businesses, you all grew very quickly, right? So you may have started with a few employees and now you have 20 employees or 75 employees or 200 employees. And it can be difficult to keep up with the different employment laws that are triggered by these various employment law thresholds. So the big buckets we're going to talk about today is legalized marijuana. Some of you might be pretty familiar with this, but just in case you're not, with what's going on in other states, we'll give you an overview of what is legalized across the country as far as medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, et cetera. We'll talk about some of the issues that go along with that. Wage and hour issues, oftentimes for small to mid-sized employers, this is your biggest potential risk area because we continue to see more and more wage and hour lawsuits being filed. And there certainly have been some big ones in the cannabis industry. Most of those are centered around this classification. So do you have employees that you're paying a salary to that aren't truly exempt level employees? Or do you potentially have some people classified as independent contractors so that they are not on your payroll system, but they're truly employees? That's some common issues that we've seen. Leave an accommodation. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, yeah, if I could, chime in on that one specific
Sure.
thing, the wage and hour thing. So one of the things that we do at Puzzle is we work with investment firms and private equity firms, et cetera. And we do buy-side diligence on frankly on these things, like on HR. And one of the HR things that comes up all the time is wage and hour. And I've seen recently where a business was looking to be acquired. Business was looking to be acquired, and they had their employees were misclassified over a period of time. And so we had to surface that to the acquiring firm and say, hey, you could have a tail FLSA issue here. And so, that impacted the buy price of the organization to the downside.
Sure. I think that's an important point. And when it comes to the federal law that governs these issues, it's the FLSA, or Fair Labor Standards Act. And like Chris said, it has a 2-year general statute of limitations if you get something wrong, or a 3-year statute of limitations if they find that there's a willful violation of that law. So that's a pretty big window as far as liability goes. And you may be asking yourself, okay, what are some things that we need to be thinking about to avoid this kind of issue? So certainly taking a look at the jobs that you have in your organization. Some of you may have job descriptions, some of you may not. If you don't have job descriptions, I encourage you to think about developing those. I think that's something that Puzzle assists with as well. But just making sure that you've outlined what those duties are and that you're comfortable with classifying certain employees as exempt, right? And making sure they meet the minimum qualifications under federal law for those exemptions. And then another piece of this is timekeeping. Do you have a policy on how employees are supposed to keep their time if they're not exempt? Are they clocking in? Are they using paper timesheets? Any method is really acceptable as long as employees can accurately record all of their hours worked, and they have the ability to request changes to those if they feel like they're not captured accurately. And then, of course, overtime. So if those employees are working over 40 hours in a work week under federal law, they're going to be entitled to overtime pay at time and a half if they're not exempt. And some state and local laws have special requirements surrounding that. We'll get into that a little bit as well. But those are kind of the big bucket items when it comes to wage and hour, making sure you're reviewing your employee classifications, making sure you have job descriptions in place that are accurate and up to date, and making sure you have policies, either in an employee handbook or standalone, that address timekeeping issues. Chris, you want to add anything?
Yeah, one other thing to concern yourselves with is, especially in this space, there are people opening they've got a grow operation, they open a dispensary and another dispensary and another dispensary, and with some of these rules and regulations, specifically around time and attendance, right, or timekeeping, they absolutely will vary by state. The laws in California are different than the laws in Massachusetts, are different than the laws in New Jersey. Or different than laws in Illinois. And, you might think, hey, you know what, there's a good opportunity, we're in California, I've got a good opportunity for, to open a dispensary in a space in Massachusetts or something like that. And oh my gosh, you have to pay your employees differently, right? And if you don't know that, it will bite you in the butt. Down the line. So that's location is absolutely one of the things you have to be wary of.
Absolutely. And some other top legal issues that we'll go into are leave and accommodation. Of course, there is the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act if you have over 50 employees within a 75-mile radius, but then there are state leaves as well. Some states have paid sick leave, some have non-paid forms of leave available, and if it's a medical issue, in addition to any prescribed leave that's available, you may also have to look at accommodating an employee's disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act or similar state and local laws. And then we also have this bucket here for harassment, discrimination, and retaliation claims. So ever since the Me Too movement started, these harassment claims are continuing to increase. So this is another area where you want to make sure that you either have an employee handbook, or at least if you're a smaller business, a set of core policies that you hand out to employees. And anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, anti-retaliation should absolutely be covered. Some states actually require you to have a written policy in place and to tell employees how to contact the local agency that handles those types of claims. It's something to be aware of.
Yeah, and some even will mandate trainings, like you have to do annual trainings. In some states, some states you can do them electronically, some you can do them over Zoom, and some you have to do those trainings in person with a certified trainer and with certified content. And if you're not doing that, you're automatically, you're kind of behind the 8 ball. Mm-hmm. Another thing that came up, and I think I mentioned it, was diversity, equity, and inclusion. It just keys into kind of what you were talking about, Deanna. That was a big topic of conversation at the show. People were asking, tons of questions about how do they make sure that they, have or foster a diverse and equitable workplace that's free of harassment, discrimination, and make sure employees feel safe and can show up in their as their whole selves. And it's not just a one day thing like, okay, we're just not going to do that. We're going to be diverse or whatever. That's a core principle. It's got to be a foundation of how you run your business. Well, we can talk a little bit more about that as well. Sorry.
Agreed. No, absolutely. And then the last item that we'll cover are OSHA and workplace safety issues. Again, some of your businesses grew very quickly, and you may not have been aware that there are a whole host of OSHA safety standards that could apply to your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Deanna, do you to that end, do you think that, or it could just be anecdotal. It could just be things that I hear, but is there a special emphasis on this space that OSHA is does OSHA put a extra emphasis on the cannabis space? Are you seeing that?
So what I've seen is OSHA has a lot of emphasis programs that overlap with the cannabis industry. So the cannabis industry is being looped into OSHA's radar by virtue of those other issues. And what do I mean by that? If you have employees that are growers that are working outside, heat stress has become a huge issue for OSHA. It's one of the top programs that they have in place right now. When it comes to manufacturing, amputation and machine guarding issues, lockout tagout is another huge emphasis program for OSHA. So that often overlaps with the industry as well. And then fall protection. Sometimes you may not even realize that you've got employees using ladders. They've never been trained on how to use a ladder. They don't understand, when a ladder needs to be secured, when they might have to be tied off, if they need to access a roof for some reason. And that's another big area where OSHA gets involved, fall protection. So I see cannabis employers getting roped into OSHA inspections because of those areas quite often.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right, so let's see.
And then, I'm sorry, lastly, before I just came to my mind too, is record keeping, right? So some employers may not even realize that they have to keep OSHA logs, right? And that if OSHA shows up at the door, the first thing they're going to do is ask for those logs because you only have 4 business hours to produce those to OSHA, so that can wait the citation as well.
Yeah, that is a phenomenal point. Where's your OSHA 200 log? My what?
Right.
So these are your maps.
So these are part of Ogletree's state law maps, and I put a link to these at the end of the presentation so you can access them. But I thought it would be helpful just to kind of guide the discussion to see, what is the state of laws across the country. And these are really good visual aids to let you see that at a glance. So the dark green states here are states that legalize marijuana for both medical and recreational purposes. The states that are in light green have medical marijuana, and the states that are in gray don't have any state laws that are generally addressing that. Like Texas, they may have some programs for low THC in very specific medical conditions, but they don't have a widespread state medical marijuana program. And this becomes important because you'll see Florida here is green, right? So we have medical marijuana in Florida. And I can't tell you how many times I will get questions from Florida employers that say, well, my employee went to Colorado on vacation and they used marijuana while they were in Colorado. And so they think they should be protected because they tested positive at work, the following Monday when they got back from vacation. In Florida, that's not protected. Even though it was legal at the time that you did it and it was legal in Colorado, the employer could technically still enforce its drug testing policy against you in Florida. And I say that to illustrate that what you want to make clear is what the expectations for your employees are, right? Like what is going to lead them to discipline? What drugs are you going to be testing for? Some states, if you're doing drug testing, have very specific requirements about the notice that you have to give employees and how you can do that testing. Some states require you to do drug testing. I'll give you another example. Florida and Georgia too, frankly, they have voluntary drug testing programs so that if you choose to follow them, you get a discount on workers' compensation premiums, but they're not required. So if you're not voluntarily opting into those programs, you can structure your program however you want. a growing trend that we are seeing, growing for our cannabis employers here, is that employers are taking marijuana off the drug testing panel for new hires and random testing. It's like, do we really even want to know? You know, in the instance of, will it trigger an accommodation requirement? So we're seeing them take that off and only leaving marijuana on the panel when it comes to reasonable suspicion, or you think someone is showing signs of impairment while they're at work or after an accident or incident in the workplace. I don't know. What are you seeing things like that at Puzzle, Chris?
So we're seeing a lot of people take it off the panel. So we're seeing a lot of people take it off the panel. But insofar as you know, from a safety in the workplace perspective, I mean, it's just like alcohol, right? You know, alcohol is legal, but you can't drive a forklift after you've had 3 martinis at lunch, right? And so it's the same sort of thing, the same rules and policies apply. We have a question actually around this. And it says, I'll just read it as it's written. We may need to translate a little bit, but it says, how does drug testing fall into this industry? Random, reasonable suspicion, pre-employment. What if someone gets, as an example, easy contact high from working in either the retail environment or manufacturing? Who does the liability fall on?
So that's a good question, right? And so I think it's important to know what state you're in, right? So you may be in a state that requires you to do some kind of mandatory drug testing, or you may not. Like, again, if you're in Florida, no requirement to do drug testing, that's up to the employer. However, as Chris alluded to, if you've got employees that are in safety sensitive positions, so they're going to be driving a forklift, even if they're going to be working outside all day and they might have a heat stress issue, if they've got any kind of safety risk associated with their job, then you're probably going to want to do drug testing in some shape or form. And again, what Chris and I are seeing is most employers are kind of moving to, at a minimum, doing this reasonable suspicion testing or post-incident testing. And to help your frontline supervisors, you should really be training your frontline supervisors on how to spot the signs and symptoms of impairment. You can give them a checklist that helps them like verify when they think that someone needs to be sent for a drug test. And that is going to help you defend any kind of issues that result. Even in the Northeast, where there are the most employee protections when it comes to use of marijuana, or California, there isn't any kind of forgiveness for coming to work impaired. No state allows you to come to work high, especially if you're in a safety sensitive role, right? So you just need to prepare employees that that's the expectation. And because the technology just isn't there yet, we don't have a widespread breathalyzer for marijuana, that if you test positive during work hours and you were showing signs of impairment, then you're going to be disciplined in accordance with our company policy. There's not going to be a get out of jail free card just because you have a medical marijuana card or it's legal in your state. Right.
And, you know, and it's important to, you know, it really is like all policies, like, you know, like just like the hours, like we work from 9 to 5, you communicate that with all of your employees. It's really important that you make sure that you communicate that with your employees. It's important that you communicate that so that they know what to expect, right? So.
Exactly. And some employees will come to you before they test positive or break some kind of policy rule that you have, and they'll say, I'm a medical marijuana user and I want an exception to your drug testing policy. Or they'll come to you and even get your input on that. So we want to think about, do we want to provide an accommodation, even if we're not legally required to do that under federal law when it comes to marijuana? And most employers, I think, in this industry are willing to make those accommodations as long as they don't create safety issues in the workplace. You just want to make sure that you're treating people consistently. So somebody can't say, well, Susie got an accommodation and Tom didn't, so I feel like it's discrimination based on gender or something along those lines. So decide how you want to handle it as a company, communicate the procedures to your employees, and then treat them consistently. And even if you decide we don't want to accommodate when we don't have to, that's okay, but you may have to provide an alternate accommodation if someone has a true medical condition.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. And I think the key to what you just said, Deanna, is consistency, right? Like and this goes back to what I said early on. This goes back to what I said early on. It is, in this industry, we've got some inexperienced entrepreneurs who are, in a high, it's like really like a tech startup, right? They're just, just jamming, just grinding, like work. I'm going to give this to Susie. Bob, I don't like him, so to heck with him. And, she's going to get this and he's not going to get that. You're too old, so you can't, you can't lift that. So you're out of here, right? Like, so you're just moving fast and thinking it's okay, right? It's not. So you have to make sure that, especially in an industry that's under the microscope as much as the cannabis space is, you really have to make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's.
Absolutely. And before we change the slide, I just have to tell my favorite marijuana joke. So, Chris, what do you get when you eat too much medical marijuana?
So first of all, so I'm in the office and there's a whole bunch of people watching me and they heard that question. So I don't know. What do you get?
A pot belly. So
All right, gotcha. And too many, and and too many holiday cookies too. I don't know what's in. I didn't touch the brownies. Just so all right, let's move on to the next one. State minimums. Oh, minimum wage.
Okay, so minimum wage. So this is just to show you an illustration. So the darkly shaded royal blue, I guess, states here have a state minimum wage that is higher than the federal wage. And the states that are in the lighter blue have a state minimum wage that is equal to the federal minimum wage. And then the other states either have no requirement or it's lesser, but you're basically required to follow the highest applicable minimum wage where you are. And it can be confusing, again, if you're moving into jurisdictions that you're not aware of the laws. So be aware of this. In addition, some states have different overtime requirements. We talked about under federal law, if employees are working, they're non-exempt, they're working over 40 hours in a work week, they would get time and a half for overtime pay. Some states have different requirements and say if you're working over 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, then you're entitled to overtime in that state. So just be aware of what the state and local requirements are where you're doing business. And then some other just kind of hot button wage and hour issues to be aware of. We talked about timekeeping and the importance of that. Also think about deductions from pay. That's another low-hanging fruit item that we often see the Department of Labor get involved with or lawsuits. So make sure that you know when you can deduct from an employee's wages and if your state requires an employee's authorization before you can do that, because that varies widely.
So how would that apply in this space?
So that would apply, let's say that you have a manufacturing area for gummies, right? So you have some employees that are working out there on the manufacturing floor and you say, employees, I'm going to deduct for either required uniform or safety equipment. I'm going to take that out of your pay and put that on you and I'm going to automatically deduct it. So that could be an issue if the employee is non-exempt and we're making them shift the cost for personal protective equipment or safety equipment. That's not going to be allowed under wage and hour laws or in OSHA's opinion. And the one exception to that is personal steel-toed boots. If they're their own boots that they get to use and take away from the workplace, that's okay. But things like safety glasses or visors or gloves or any other type of materials that they may need to do their job or anything that's uniform related, that's really provided for the convenience of the employer because it's something that the business wants the employee to do, you're not going to be able to make those deductions. Under federal law, the trigger is any deduction that would bring an employee below minimum wage or cut into their overtime if they're non-exempt. If they're exempt, you shouldn't be making these deductions from their pay at all, even if the employee breaks your equipment. If they're exempt, you can't make those deductions.
Okay, so exempt meaning exempt from overtime, so that means salaried, and non-exempted, those are your hourly employees.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And kind of oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, no, go ahead, because I was going to.
And kind of the last issue in this space that everyone should just be on the lookout for are direct deposit and pay cards. If you are mandating direct deposit or pay cards, be aware that there may be some state-specific issues surrounding that as well. Gotcha.
Yeah, what I was going to say, what struck me was the minimum wage, like looking at some of the states that don't have a minimum wage, so which equals their minimum wage is the federal minimum wage. Just seeing it, right, is just striking. So anyway, move on to paid sick, everyone's favorite. Okay. So this I feel like is one of the most difficult areas for multi-state employers to keep up with. So again, you may not be, if you're a smaller business, you may not be subject to the Family and Medical Leave Act because you've got fewer than 50 employees, but that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have anything to worry about. So here in the darkly colored states, these are the states that require private employers to provide employees with paid leave that can be used for any reason whatsoever. And the lighter purple states have a law that requires private employers to provide employees with paid leave that can be used for illness or other statutorily defined reasons, which might be childbirth or things related to pregnancy and other similar issues. So you can see this is a growing trend and it's on the edges of the country right now. So on the West Coast and in the Northeast, you have a lot of states that are providing for paid sick leave. And these are all across the board. Some of them have an employee trigger threshold where they only kick in if you've got more than 15, 20, 50 employees in the state. Some apply even if you have one employee in the state. And some of them are staggered. So if you have fewer than X amount of employees, the leave's unpaid, but if you have more than that, the leave is paid. So it can be very complicated. And if you're in one of these states, you just want to make sure that you're like, okay, now I'm aware that there's a requirement. I need to make sure that my policy matches up with the state requirement. And there's a new state issue that got some press in January of this year, where the Washington Department of Labor filed suit against a cannabis shop called Lovely Bud Shop for unpaid overtime and failure to provide paid sick leave to employees. So it is something that's on the radar. It's happening in the industry. So you want to make sure that you, again, have those handbooks in place or at a minimum kind of policies that are addressing these core issues when it comes to timekeeping, exemptions, pay deductions, when you're going to pay employees, how you're going to pay employees, the leave that they're entitled to, and making sure that they're protected from harassment, discrimination, and retaliation in the workplace. And you know what's really interesting, even more than, and so having the policies and procedures in place, like having them in writing and everybody signs off on them, that's great, super important. But something that just dawned on me is, again, you've got those, a lot of times you've got those inexperienced managers, right? That those inexperienced managers and experienced leaders who, would, as opposed to, letting, employee X go out on, on paid sick leave or, or get overtime, just say, hey, listen, you know what? Listen, you're over 40 hours this week. You work 45, just take 5 hours off next week. Or instead of paid sick leave, listen, we'll just pay you. It's all well and good until it's not, right? It's illegal, right? And so, those managers, your leadership team is really got to be trained. They've got to be brought up to speed. They have to not only understand what the policies are, but they need to know how to execute on those policies, and even more important than that, that they've got to be mature enough in their leadership to know when to ask the question and who to ask the question to, right? So I'm thinking of one of the folks that I talked to in Las Vegas, and they had that problem. A couple, they had employees in a bunch of different states because they grew in one state, and they had distribution in another, and then they had dispensaries a couple of dispensaries over a couple of different states, and they've got, management, they've got leaders in the individual areas. They're kind of at the supervisory level, and things would show up or happen and they wouldn't know what to do or who to call. And so they made what seemed like the right decision at the time, but is absolutely the wrong decision for the business. And, it's just super dangerous, right? And so having some level of support somewhere, for leadership, so that they can get the right advice, so that they can know how to do the right things for your company, is really, really important.
Mhm. Those are all great points, Chris. Like, you're right. You can't waive your rights to any of these laws. Like, you can't say it's okay with me if you don't pay me overtime. The government is not going to accept that. So the training is key. And I think, of course, the gold standard is making sure you're taking a look at your policies on an annual basis and doing that employment law 101 refresher for your supervisors who are expected to enforce your policies, so that they know what they're expected to do, and so that they know the trigger words, right? Like, if an employee complains, oh, I think I'm being retaliated against, or I think I'm owed paid sick time and I didn't get it, who does that supervisor go to? If you don't have an internal HR team, do you have a partner with someone like Puzzle, or do you have someone who's an office manager that's going to handle that for you? Think about that in advance and make sure that your supervisors know how to elevate those concerns, so you have an opportunity to address them before an employee sues you or goes to a government agency.
Yeah, Deanna, I think I've told you this before, but one of the reasons we started an HR company was we really just don't like HR, right? But we also know how critical it is, for an organization to not only stay in compliance. Forget about staying in compliance is one thing, but I mean, really creating and maintaining a motivating environment where people want to do the work necessary, to grow themselves and grow their business, right? You need, like an HR infrastructure sort of for that. So, someone in HR told me a long, long time ago that I will never forget. This was an HR business partner of mine that I had, back a lot of years ago. She said, because I was that inexperienced manager. Right. I was literally an inexperienced manager, and I would take my salespeople out and we would go drinking and, go to the bar after work, et cetera, and, have a grand old time. And, and so my HR business partner she says, Chris, we're talking about my team and talking about, kind of the environment. And I'm like, yeah, what are you talking about, Julie? Everybody loves me. Everybody loves the team. They love the environment. And she goes, you know what, Chris? One thing I know about human resources, one thing I know about employees is they're happy until they're not. They're happy until they're not. And that stuck with me until this day. So you really have to make sure that, to find a way. That's what HR can do, is like help you with that, have that balance between engagement and compliance. So
Absolutely.
So let's go to the next one. Oh, speaking of which.
So more on training, as Chris said earlier, there are some states actually require you to conduct sexual harassment training. So if you see yourself in a state in green, know that you're required to do that. So you are going to have that type of program. And as Chris said, some of them have to be in person. Some of them can be online, but they usually have to have an interaction component to them, where you have a quiz or click the screen to make sure that employees are participating. And these are also some of the states that require you to have a written policy addressing it, that tells employees who to go to if they want to report a complaint, and or what is the local agency that's available to them if they want to go outside of the organization. Some states don't require you to direct them outside, some states do. So make sure that you're aware of the requirement. And one of the things that I have seen, particularly with small businesses that grew quickly, is if you have employees that are working on an odd shift, like an overnight shift in your manufacturing plant, make sure they have somebody they can go to during their shift. Don't expect them to like come in on off hours to report to the one HR person that you might have on site. Designate somebody else where they can direct those concerns so that they can get immediate attention. Employers actually have a legal defense, it's an affirmative defense. If you had a program in place to prevent harassment from occurring and you provided employees with a way to report it, and your employees didn't report it, or they did, and you took immediate action to correct it. So as long as you are addressing these concerns when they're raised, you're going to have a legal defense, but you want to take them seriously. Even if you don't believe they're true, you may have to still conduct an investigation. It might be that the claims are unfounded, but then you've done what you needed to do to protect your company.
Mhm. And again, I think about the restaurant space, right? Like I think about, what happens at, restaurants. You've got kind of younger folks working late, access to alcohol, kind of that. It's a recipe for these issues, right? And so, and again, look, if you've got a grow in Washington, right, and you've got a dispensary in New York, you need to be concerned with these things. So or even if your corporate headquarters is in Florida, right, but you've got operations in California, New York, Illinois, like these rules apply to you, right? So
Absolutely, that's a good point. And another area is if you have friends or family that are working together in your company, try to avoid the direct supervisor subordinate relationship between those folks because like Chris said, it's all good until it's not, right? So if you have people that are romantically involved, married or not, and they're reporting to one another and their relationship ends for whatever reason, that's a recipe for you to get some kind of harassment complaint in the future. So be aware if you've got those kind of relationships and supervisory subordinate situations, you can prevent that. You can have a policy against it, and you can require your employees to disclose that to you. Another issue I see is some employers think, oh, well, an employee came to me and said that Susie made a pass at me when a few of us were at a bar after work. So I don't have to worry about that because it didn't happen in the workplace. You do have to worry about it. As soon as you know about it, if it involves your employees, it is your problem, unfortunately. Whether it's online or in person, you may still have to do an investigation there into that.
right, we again, I'm on the other side of glass of a whole bunch of HR program managers here at PuzzleHR program managers, and I know the number of investigations that we're called into. Thankfully, not many of them are serious. Not many of them actually lead any place, but you have to run down every single one, because you never know. So
absolutely, and it's a great service that you have that. If you don't have the capacity or the expertise in-house to do those investigations, you can absolutely reach out to a Puzzle or an employment attorney if you work one and get help with that, particularly if the person accused is high level in your organization, so you can avoid the perception of bias.
Yeah, absolutely. If it involves somebody up the food chain organizationally, you have to go outside. You really need to get third-party assistance with that. OSHA. Ooh, OSHA.
OSHA. So basically the story here is if you are in a darkly colored state, you have a state OSHA plan. So the plan is run by your state and not federal OSHA. If you're in the lightly colored state, you're subject to federal OSHA's jurisdiction. And that can become really important because the standards are different. Like heat stress that I talked about is huge on the radar pretty much all across the board, whether it's a state plan or a federal OSHA, and the requirements are different. Under federal OSHA, you don't have to have a written heat stress program. If you're in California, you do. They have a state plan that requires that. Under federal OSHA, things like breaks, access to shade, they're highly encouraged, and you need to make sure that you're providing enough of that to not expose employees to hazard. But in California, they're required at specific intervals. You have to provide shade, you have to provide breaks at certain intervals. So be aware, again, if you're in one of these state plan states, what those hot button issues might be. And I think in addition to heat stress, if you have employees working outside, of course, like I said, with manufacturing, lockout, tagout, hazardous energy control is a big one that we see. And that's another area where you need to have a written program in place that explains to employees what your policy is, who's authorized to conduct lockout, tagout, how that is supposed to be done. And you're going to have to be able to show training on these issues to satisfy OSHA if there is an inspection or an injury in your workplace.
And having that training, if you do it right, if you get the right workers' compensation, you can even get a discount on your workers' compensation policy, right? Like everyone wants a safe workplace. No one wants anyone to get hurt. So really is super important to keep an eye on that, especially in this industry.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And in fact, some insurance companies will even provide someone, like a claims adjuster, to come out and do a walkthrough of your business to point out any issues. Just be aware that is not a confidential document. So if OSHA were to come in and you had an audit and they identified an issue that you didn't correct, and now OSHA today sees that issue, that could set you up for a serious or a willful OSHA citation. So take advantage of those programs, particularly when they're at no cost, but make sure you're doing the action items that are recommended, and absolutely do that if there is a report in writing that says what you were supposed to do. That's a common issue.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. So like if you hire a third party, whether it's your insurance company or just a third party workers' comp and they see something, right, and they say something and you're like, then that's I guess that's willful, like neglect, right?
Yes, and the only way to avoid that is you can work with legal counsel to hire an expert or safety consultant for you. Like if oh man, we really grew fast, we didn't have time to build out our program, we need a lot of help. You can have legal counsel engage that expert for you under attorney-client privilege, and any report that's done for the attorney to advise you on legal risk will be privileged. No one can have that, and oftentimes consultants can do it at a better hourly rate than attorneys. So sorry to bag on attorneys there, and they have more expertise to go in and spot those little issues. So we do that all the time, and my firm is work with consultants to make sure that you're doing what you need to do when it comes to safety, because it's a lot. A lot of different things can apply depending upon the component of your business. But at a minimum, you will want some kind of generic policy that says we're complying with all federal, state, and local safety standards, and we want you and require you to report any safety hazards to us, to report any workplace injuries or accidents or near misses to us, so that we can address those, right? If we don't know about it, we can't address it, and we're not going to retaliate against you for making those reports. At a minimum, you want to have that policy in writing so that you can show that if OSHA shows up.
Yeah, attorney-client privilege. That's a pencils up moment for me. That's a good one to write down. So this I think is this the last slide? Yeah. So I'll stop sharing now. So that it's because I just realized we've been chit-chatting for 50 minutes, Deanna. So if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to pop them in. But I will tell you that the industry, the cannabis industry in particular, is really our folks in the space are really kind of starting to see, where a few years ago it was kind of, Bitcoin, right? It was very much kind of the wild, wild west. Now, as more and more states are flirting with some level of legality, there's more and more, just a bigger lens over the cannabis space for certain. So I do want to pick the share back up. So action items, they're right here. You've got to update your policies and procedures. You've got to train your employees. You've got to train your managers. Remote work agreements. Talk to me a little bit about that, Deanna.
My other phone's ringing. So this one we didn't quite get into, but I know when talking about either hiring or employee retention issues, post-COVID, we're seeing more and more requests to work from home, right? Like you may have positions in your organization that you just can't possibly work from home, but you may have some that you can, and you're probably going to get a request for that. If that's something that you're going to allow, consider having a remote work agreement with that employee that says, this is where we understand you are going to be working from. You need to let us know if that changes. These are the technical requirements to make sure that you're working from a secure system, right? If you're going to be logging into our intranet, we want you to be on a secure internet system. If you are non-exempt hourly, this is how you're supposed to report your time. If you expect them to come into work on a periodic basis, put that in there so there's no doubt about it. How are you going to check in with them about their performance? What are the expectations of the job? And have them sign off on that. Also, it can allow you a vehicle to, if you don't already have one, put non-disclosure of confidential information, non-solicitation of your employees and your customers, and any kind of non-compete that you might have to protect the information, because they are going to have more unfettered and unsupervised access to your trade secret and the confidential information. So you can address all of those pieces in a separate agreement with the employee if they're going to be telecommuting or working remotely on an ongoing or permanent basis.
So how, and yes, and so especially in this like industry, right? Because the majority of your employees are going to be on-prem, right? You can't work from home at a dispensary. You can't work from home as a trimmer, right? You can't work from home as a grower. But if you're in marketing or accounting or what have you, right? You can. And so, and that actually makes it more difficult because it's not the norm. You've got one or two or three people. So really having that, having that in place and training your leadership team, right? Even managers, right? And training them or giving them the support to actually manage a remote workforce is really important, right? So we have another question. It's what, and this is an interesting one, right? So it's like, what recommendations do you have when it comes to communicating the importance of human resources in this space, right? Everything that we talked about today, and this is true, everything we talked about today is, it's across all industries. It's kind of the table stakes for human resources, but it may not be important, to the entrepreneurs in this space, because, and the next comment is like this, this industry is, can be more loose than others. How can we, how do we tell people how important HR is in the cannabis world?
So one thing that I have done that I have found to be effective is almost putting together a little summary like we did today for your top executives and your owners of these are the top employment law issues that are out there. And it's part of my job to make sure that you understand that, right? And in order to have a shield against these, we need HR. We either need someone in-house that's dedicated to that, or we need a partner who can come in and help us. And you can show them, and I'd be happy to, anyone is curious, you can email me and I'm happy to share it with you. Just a quick bullet point summary of some recent cases. Like I said, like the state of Washington Department of Labor, $300,000 right now that the company is on the line for in unpaid wages and overtime. A recent EEOC charge on sexual harassment in the cannabis industry, $175,000 just to settle the case. So these are big ticket items, and I think once your executives and owners see that, they might start to appreciate like, oh, if we get called on this, it's a big deal. It's something that could shut down your business in some cases, or can really inhibit your ability to make your bottom line numbers for a given year or several years if you get caught in one of these big lawsuits. So that's something I think that should be communicated to them when you're talking about the importance of these issues. Is the stakes are very high and there are real dollar amounts that are at issue here.
Yeah, how many kind of new startup companies have got $300,000 sitting around, to cover a lawsuit or to cover a fine, right? And that can absolutely impact your business. And another thing, we're running out of time, but one thing that we didn't really talk about was kind of, and I'll kind of spend like 60 seconds. It's talent acquisition and employee engagement. right, in the space, it can be such a hard charging, high driving industry, right? Turnover kills, right? So speed kills. Speed creates turnover, turnover kills. And so, you really have to, all of the things that Deanna talked about, FLSA, paid leave, harassment training, all those things, like I said, they're table stakes. They're kind of foundational to any sort of business, but not having those things in place degrades employee engagement, right? Like if your employees don't feel safe, whether it be, physically or emotionally, if they don't feel like they can kind of show up and be, their whole selves in an organization, if they feel that their, place of work is not equitable or inclusive, as an example, then what's going to happen? Forget about it, and forget about their, being paid fairly or not. They're going to leave, right? And where are they going to go? They're going to go to a place that, that is diverse, that is, with that has the same values that they have, right? I can't tell you the number of people that came up and talked to me and said, we're growing really fast. We've got like 50% turnover. I'm like, holy crap. What if your turnover were 30%? I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be unbelievable for the business. I'm like, what are you doing to get there? And they're like, we don't know. We're just, we gave people, we have pizza parties or some crap like that, right? Like that's, that's not it, right? You really need to take a look at your organization fundamentally as a whole. Hire somebody to do it for you, puzzle somebody else. Take a look at the organization, ask their employees what they see, what they feel, how they feel about the organization, and then use that information to inform what you do to, what you do to create and maintain that environment where people can come in, and feel good about the work that they're doing for your organization, right? And again, yes, that's, that's table stakes. You have to do that regardless of the industry that you're in. But in this industry in particular, that is growing so fast, the competition for talent is outrageous all across the country. If you're not doing those sorts of things, if you're not really kind of taking a look internally at your org, you're setting yourself up for you're setting yourself up to lose to the competition is all. So with that said, we're coming up right on 3 o'clock. Deanna, I want to thank you once again for spending some time with me here on I forgot to mention the Puzzle Pieces webcast. So thanks for spending some time with us today. Always enjoy talking to you, even though you scare me. And I actually took there's a couple things that I have to do here now internally at Puzzle, which happens every time we talk. So thank you so much for coming in, folks. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you back in another, I guess, webisode. What are we calling these things for one of our other talks that we're having coming up here in the future. If you've got the you'll get information from us. If you need to reach out, feel free to reach out to Deanna at Ogletree Deakins or myself here at PuzzleHR. So with that said, have a great rest of your day, a better weekend, and we'll talk to y'all again real soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it. At least I'm on your side, right?
All right, bye.
Bye.